Hey, welcome back to Connection Point Studies. It's great to have you back. We're in this series that's going to take you right up to Easter. And we've been having fun thinking about the choices that the disciples and Jesus made and others have made around Jesus. And we're also thinking about our own choices. Now, you have a quote to kind of warm us up to this study. So you got to talk about the quote. It's in their notes. And where did you get this quote? I mean, it's a great theologian, right? Mike Tyson?
Yeah, Mike Tyson, great theologian. It was funny because I was reading him, reflecting back on his story, you know, and Mike made, by some estimates, over $200 million and then ended up broke. And he said that he started out as a 19-year-old who was robbing crack houses, and then one day, and the next day he's world champion heavyweight boxer, right? Yeah. and then he said, as he reflected back on that, who am I? What am I? I don't even know who I am. I'm just a dumb child who's being abused and robbed by lawyers. I'm just a dumb, pugnacious fool. I'm just a fool who thinks he's someone. Wow. You know, but talk about someone who
kind of lost his way, didn't he? Which is, okay, so our warm-up question, we want you to, it's not going to be that hard for you to do. The warm-up question is, who am I? So I was thinking about that. Maybe you think about your identity in maybe 4 or 5 different ways, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And before they come back, what do we want them to read?
So you might want to read Matthew chapter 16, and then when you come back, we want to ask the question, what were the Pharisees and Sadducees thinking when they asked Jesus for a sign?
Okay, so take time, do your warm-up question, and then read and answer that other question. So we've read this, chapter 16, and we're thinking about the Pharisees and the Sadducees. What is a Pharisee and a Sadducee, just for someone that doesn't know?
Right, so Pharisees were kind of religious leaders, more like pastors or, you know, preachers like yourself.
Right.
And then Sadducees were more political leaders.
They were ruling class, weren't they?
Right, yeah. And so most of the time they didn't actually get along.
Yeah.
But they did get along in one thing. They didn't like Jesus.
They
Neither
did not like Jesus at all.
Right.
They didn't like him, right. And so why were they looking for a reason to not to believe, or even though all these signs had taken place?
Yeah, so it's interesting to me that they come to Jesus. It says they tested him by asking him to show a sign from heaven. Now, this wasn't the first time. I mean, they had seen miracles. Jesus did miracles right in front of their face. And so the only thing I can conclude is that they were hoping that if they put him on the spot, he wouldn't be able to do it.
Right. He'd have a failure somewhere down the line because he was so successful up to that point.
Right.
They were hoping he'd have a failure.
Yeah.
That's kind of interesting always to look at how someone responds to pressure. So let's take a look at how Jesus responds and look at verses 2 through 4 and look specifically for how Jesus responds to this kind of pressure. Okay, so Ron, did he have x-ray eyes or something? It seems like he could see their motive, right?
You know, sometimes the Bible says Jesus saw their heart, or he knew their thoughts. And sometimes you think, oh, he read their mind, like used supernatural powers. Sometimes you don't need that.
Yeah.
Anybody could see this, right? He calls them a wicked and adulterous generation. And you look at that and you think, wow, that's pretty harsh, Jesus. But he's trying to be honest with them. He's like, you don't really want to know.
Yeah.
And he left them. He didn't try to argue with them. He just left them.
Wow. So as you look a little bit further and dig a little bit deeper, we want you to look at verses 9 through 14 and answer this question. What would a sign really have changed their minds? Which is a great question. So look at that, verses 9 through 14, and you think about how you'd answer that.
And that's actually in Matthew chapter 12.
Oh, it is? Okay.
Yeah,
Matthew chapter 12, verses 9 through 14. Okay. So do you think, I know what I think, do you think it would have really changed their minds?
No, because they had already seen this, right? In Matthew 12, we see this story. They're in the synagogue. Jesus sees the man with the shriveled up hand, and he says to them, is it right to heal a man on the Sabbath or not? He puts them on the spot, right? And he did the miracle right in front of their face, and all they could think is, let's kill him.
Yeah, we don't like this. Don't do that on Sabbath, And then I also think of, in the months to come and in the weeks to come, they're going to see Jesus do amazing things. Mm-hmm. So they do get to see those signs.
Yeah.
And it doesn't help.
No.
It doesn't work. It's just not there. So what did Jesus ask the disciples? As you think of this next question, think in verses 13 through 20 and look specifically about what Jesus was asking his disciples. And then how did they answer?
So, I've been to the place where this happened. It's actually a place called Banaeus. It's right at the base of Mount Hermon in Israel. It's beautiful, lush springs of water flowing from the mountain. And the disciples have gone to get away. And Jesus asked them, who do you say that I am? First he asked them, who do people say that I am? Kind of like, well, let's get a read on what people think. And they're,
Right.
They think you're a prophet. Some think you're John the Baptist, all this. And then he nails in on, who do you say that I am? And I think it's a question that he confronts all of us with. This is our choice, that we have to make a choice about who we believe Jesus is.
Whenever I'm talking to someone about their personal faith in God, I start with a broader sense of God and who God is, and not just who you make God to be. But it always comes back to the question, who do you think Jesus is? Because when you get down to that question, it determines your faith. Jesus is asking his disciples the most important question they could ever answer.
Yeah.
And I think he asks us that too, doesn't he? He
Absolutely.
really does. So how did Peter respond to Jesus' explanation? Look at verses 21 through 28, and then think about Jesus' reactions. Okay, so Jesus responded, or Peter responded in a very positive way, right?
Yeah. So it's funny because first Peter says, "You're the Christ," right? And Jesus is like, "Good job, Peter.
Yeah, you're the man."
and then he goes on and says, "And let me tell you what that means. Yeah. I'm going to go to Jerusalem. I'm going to be tried, go to the cross." And then Peter's like, "Jesus, come here for a second. No way, that's not going to happen."
Yeah.
And then Jesus says this shocking thing. He says, "Get behind me, Satan."
Isn't that funny? From the highs and lows of life, I wonder how many minutes that took for that to happen.
Yeah.
From Peter, you're the greatest thing, to Peter, you're Satan. Can you imagine the emotion of that? Do you ever feel that way?
Yeah, sometimes.
In life?
And it hit me that this was another case where we want to make God do our plan. So Peter's thinking, that sounds like a really bad plan, Jesus.
I got a better idea. Since I'm the guy, I'm the one you're going to build the church on, listen to me.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, it's not very good. Yeah, it's not a good plan. So,
no.
Well, let's think about that in our own lives. Think about your own plans and what you're expecting God to do. Maybe some of you need to simply allow God to do what he needs to do in your life. And this is a good chance for you to think about the choices you make, and even the choice that as to what you believe about Jesus Christ. It's a good time to share. Take a little bit of time, go around the room and share and pray for each other, and we'll see you next week at Connection Point Studies.